one instant way to start loving yourself.
Yeah.
But you had a qualification. I wanted to know what's the qualification? What's in the brackets there, Clayton?
This may scare you. This may terrify you. Yeah. Because there is, in this video, in this content, we're going to invite you into it's really a call to courage. It's a call to take a stand for your truth, to take a stand for your value, and to create yourself as whole and complete and deeply loving of who you are, regardless of the circumstance that you're in. And so I think it might make a little sense just to name who this video is really going to resonate with. I believe it's going to resonate with almost everybody who listens to it, because I don't know if there's anybody that can't relate to a circumstance within a relationship that ends up being a call to courage for one to step more into their authentic self. But you are going to find this content particularly useful if you are feeling like you're in a relationship or a connection where you're being strung along. Maybe it's been a hot and cold connection. Perhaps you're finding that the connection is one where you kind of know that it's not good for you. Like there's a part of you that when you really get honest with yourself, there's something here that does not feel healthy. It feels like it could be borderline toxic, and you're contemplating walking away. And then lastly, if you've recently gone through a breakup or are contemplating a breakup, like this content, I think is really going to land, and it's going to help you come into contact and have access to more power, more clarity, and more connection with yourself.
Yeah. All really good. Thanks. Yeah.
Yeah.
So would it be fair to say that the essence of this, the way to start loving yourself, is something about being in your truth?
Yeah. Yeah. And I would love, this is something that I've heard you say a lot, the being in your truth. And just for anybody where that concept, that terminology might seem a little unclear, what do you mean by that?
Yeah, that's a good question. So being in your truth is fully claiming your experience of what resonates for you, what's meaningful for you. For a lot of us, I think it comes in a bodily form, right? Some people just, we talk about a full body knowing, right? And not every time you're going to have that, but you might just sort of know something like, I know this is good for me. And let's just step outside of the realm of relationship for a moment. This could be, a friendship. This could be, a career. This could be, do you want to go on this place on holiday? And you might just notice, you know what, that's not actually true for me, right? Even if it's got beautiful beaches and waterfalls, and I like those things. Right now, what's true for me is, I actually need some stimulation, and I want to go be in an urban environment, right? So there's something about being in your truth, which is, true to this. I use this word a lot, season, right? This season cycle, this moment of your life. Truth in this subjective, personal way tends not to just be static. There could be things that are ongoingly true for you, right? You're always going to prefer summer to winter, right? But there's other things where it's like, in this season of my life, maybe it's actually true for me that I don't want to be in a relationship because I want to do some work on myself that I know I need to do because it's just come up again and again and again in previous connections, or there's a thing that I've been avoiding. And of course, we all avoid things because we're overwhelmed, we're stressed, we're just trying to make ends meet, we're trying to get by, we're trying to find a job, keep a job, stay healthy, recover our health. I mean, there's so many demands on our attention in this kind of modern, postmodern life. But this is a different way of talking about truth than scientific objective truth, right? Which is we're going to look for some verifiable, repeatable, objective evidence of something. This is my truth. And this has only come online, I think, as a way of talking about experience in the last 50 years, because it is a facet of postmodernism, and it's a facet of what's actually true for me on the inside. And it doesn't have to be true for you. 9 out of 10 people might prefer this type of chicken, and I prefer this type of chicken. That's my truth, and that's okay. But owning that and having the kind of courage and confidence to take a stand for it, that takes practice for most of us ongoingly.
Yeah. And it takes courage too, for sure. It takes one's ability to, number one, identify what your truth is, right? What is it that you really want, and to be able to take a stand for that. And I I think that can be really difficult because I think that sometimes people trade their truth for connection, for love.
Absolutely.
And they trade truth to avoid pain.
I've done that. I've done that a number of times. So, I'll just own that. That's for any of us that possibly, connection / harmony might be a higher immediate value or our go-to place versus truth. That's likely to be our experience. So I imagine that most people listening right now possibly have that as a certainly in the past, their go-to bias. They're going to do the thing that preserves connection at the expense sometimes of honoring what might be true for you. And that's hard, right? It's hard when you care about connection. And sometimes caring about connection means actually being willing to let certain things go, right? Something that maybe nags you or something that's kind of annoying, where you actually look at it and say, this little thing isn't worth getting in the way of the connection. But I think what you're talking about, or we're talking about at the heart of this video, is not just like a little nagging kind of, we're talking about the sort of core of someone's truth, right? The kind of the big pieces, what's really true for me when I hit my journal, when I inquire, when I go into it, what is true for me in a little bit more of a, not just how I feel this afternoon, but today, tomorrow, as I'm inquiring the next week, this, Al Gore had that movie, An Inconvenient Truth, right? Sometimes our personal truth is really inconvenient because we're no longer aligned in a relationship, or this career I've been doing it for 25 years. I've now realized I don't want to keep climbing that wall, or maybe I don't even want to work in this whole industry, or, you fill in the blanks. So my question back to you is, if someone's listening to that and they're like, okay, I sort of get what you mean, like personally true for me, like almost if I tune everyone else out and say, what's true and reach for me, do you have any tips on how to get closer to that? Is that the same thing? Because you used the word sort of, what do you want? Is what you want exactly the same thing as what's true for me? Is that part of it? How do you think of that?
Yeah. Well, I think there is a distinction here. I think that what someone wants might be sometimes driven by fear. It could be like, I want to stay in this relationship, or I want this person to love me. But deep down, almost what I know is true is that maybe I need to leave, because what's actually best for me is something different than what I want. And so I think that when we can start to get in touch with what we feel is
wow, wait, can I slow you down just for a moment? Because I think you said something really profound there. So did you just say what's actually best for me is something different than what I want?
Yeah.
Wow.
And that may be the case. And it also, it may be that sometimes what we want can be what's best for us. And it just is more of a circuitous journey to get there, right? That we maybe need to go through some pain through the lesson of getting what we want and realizing it's maybe creates pain, so that we can ask again and want something different. But yes, I am making that distinction right now. And I know that may even occur a bit as a paradox too.
So I have a follow-up question for you. So I know that you're an NLP, neuro-linguistic programming master practitioner, right? I know one of the frames or ways of thinking about things in NLP is like you move towards certain things and you kind of move away from certain things. Like we're drawn towards pleasure, let's say, and we move away from pain. And it seems to me some of us are broadly more on one side of the fence than the other. So if you're a moving away from person, you tend to move away from things you don't like. Do you think that makes it harder to get in touch with your authentic desire? Because actually a lot of your circuitry is about what do I fear and have a pain association with, and I'm just going to kind of move away from it.
I think that when we're plugged into what it is that we don't want, and we're creating strategies, and we're consistently tracking what we don't want and trying to stop what we don't want from happening, we're plugging into a lower octane fuel that may allow us to survive situations, but it's not a recipe for us actually thriving. I think when we begin to actually switch our orientation towards identifying what it is that we want, what it is that we value, what it is that we want to create and bring to life, we can plug into a different type of energy and actually start to live by certain principles that we want, or certain principles we want to live by, certain values that we want to, that bring actual fulfillment to our life. And it's not to say that moving away from is not important from time to time. I think there's absolutely situations in which
a dog's about to bite you, you might want to move away from that.
Right. But if we're operating in our relationships that way, where we're in conversation with our partners from a place of trying to avoid bad things happening, avoid pain, avoid them leaving us, we can often end up in a very unhappy codependent situation, or a situation where they feel controlled by us and where we're consistently injecting fear into the relationship.
Yeah. Could you just unpack that just slightly? So when you say they might feel controlled by us, if you're operating fear, could you just connect those dots?
Yeah. So if I'm noticing that I'm in relationship with you, Jack, and I'm coming from this standpoint of like, if we don't hang out, the relationship's going to end, or if we're not talking every couple times a week, something bad's going to happen with our connection. Maybe our friendship will deteriorate, or some resentment will build. I'm continually injecting this kind of fear into the relationship, and I'm not bringing the intention of creating something with you. I'm bringing the intention of controlling, and trying to keep things in a certain contained way that I think it should go, to avoid something bad from happening. So I'm bringing an energy of control rather than an energy of enrollment into the relationship. Rather than an energy of inspiration, I'm bringing an energy of fear. And I think that's what people push away from. I think that's what people rebel against. It's just, you can see this with children when parents raise kids. If parents are raising children with injecting fear into them and trying to control their behavior rather than allowing some sense of freedom and allowing the child to be autonomous and to learn on their own, the child was more likely to rebel because they're feeling controlled and manipulated. And I don't think that's much different in an intimate relationship.
Yeah. I've got more questions, but I just want to check in with you. Are you kind of happy with this line of this sort of tributary of inquiry, or is there anything else you want to?
Yes, I love it, and I also I want to tie it in with this, with anybody that's listening right now, like to actually bring it to this kind of acute place where people might be in a make or break situation in their relationship, or they're, it could be a make or break conversation that they need to have with somebody, where there's something that they need to stand for, or they are contemplating walking away, which is an ultimate act of honoring oneself. It's the ultimate act of, and I would dare to say it's one of the ultimate acts of self-love, is to walk away from a dynamic that is no longer aligned. And I know that brings up an incredible amount of fear. And even hearing that could be triggering for people, because in some ways you almost have to let go of the hope of things changing. You're letting go of that, but in service of yourself and being able to move on and create something new with yourself or with somebody else. So I'd love to tie that in, just so that we're kind of landing this in the 3-dimensional reality and kind of bringing this philosophy into that. So I'm happy to go down that line of questioning, but there's something we can do to fuse that in here.
Well, so just to what you were saying. So the first thing that comes up for me, having been in situations like this, so it could be the most sort of radical act of self-love is to actually take your stand, claim your truth, right? And that includes the possibility that you might have to end the relationship or downshift or walk away in some way. We also know that a lot about relationship is learning how to love, right? Learning how to love better, right? I think that's a Harville Hendricks phrase, right? Learning to love better. And so I'm imagining for some people listening, that might sort of be coming up, right? So at what point do I say, well, actually, this is what sort of I need, and I'm taking my stand, sort of, versus like, well, what does the we need? What does the relationship need? What does the other person need? Because sometimes if you defocus those two things and you just say, well, what's important for me? What's my truth? What do I need? That might still be really difficult to discern, but it's probably going to be a little easier to discern than if you're like, well, what do I need? What do you need? What do we need? So I'm kind of curious how you think of the I, you, and we in that sort of situation. Do you tend to think it's best to focus on the I in that situation and trust that the other two things sort of follow for that? Or is there some situation where the I might have a different answer to the we?
Yeah. So I'd love to actually bring up a real world example that I think would open this up. When I sent an email out to my readers I got a question back from somebody that let's bring in, and maybe we can dissect this together to really open up this concept of what you're talking about. So essentially, here's a question. Clayton, I'd love to get your input on this. I'm in a relationship for 3 years now. It's generally pretty good. Actually, we both have discussed being committed and being together. In the last year, twice so far, and sometimes with little comments, he sort of blindsides me with criticisms that sting very much. This is unexpected, and it feels cruel. To me, what he is complaining about are just human differences, but he expresses them like they're character flaws. Example, you have no goals. I live for my goals. It's like you don't think or use your brain, and I use my brain, or use your brain. Words matter. So in some ways, almost like kind of hammering in logic over perhaps understanding emotion. All of these statements are unhelpful, untrue, and hurtful. There are more, but I am trying to keep it short. I feel like I cannot stand another session of this type of insult. We have talked about it, but he says I'm too fragile. Okay, so my question is how to know, like, when do I know whether it's going to improve or when it's best to run? Because I feel like this is harming my self-esteem. Okay.
Yeah.
So just to bring in, to bring in your concept here to the situation. I mean, first of all, this is painful, right? This is, you're with somebody, you're incredibly close to them. Arguably, they might be one of the closest people to you in your life, and they've got criticisms about the way that you're being and the way that you operate that are hurtful. And at some point, when is it best to cut your losses? And so I think in this orientation, my recommendation, and this is my opinion about it, but what is the conversation that needs to happen that is in service of the we space? And so rather than necessarily maybe giving up on the relationship immediately or walking away from it, which actually could be the best option, what would honoring the we space look like in this situation? Now, I could say, okay, well, honoring the I might be walking away, but honoring the I also might be like getting into a fight with your partner and defending yourself and defending your value and almost passing blame over on them, letting them know that they're being abusive and that you're not going to be talked to that way, or getting into some type of argument where you're valuing the I above the we. And I think that's important. I think that's one stage of stepping in and owning your voice. But I think there's another way of being in this, of honoring the we. And honoring the we would be to look at the dynamic that you want out of a relationship and to hold your partner and to hold yourself to the idea that there is a certain, like, you love them, and that there's a certain way that we are committed to speaking to each other to create this, because this is unhealthy. So I'm not fighting against the other person, but I'm fighting for the relationship. I'm fighting for the we space. And I'm naming, like, what is being said. Yeah. What is being said here, what's coming out is hurtful, and it's actually toxic to our relationship, which is sacred and precious to me. And I will not stand for it. And I will not receive this kind of dialogue, because we're both better than that. I think that's actually standing for the we space versus necessarily standing for the I in the relationship. And at that point, in some ways, that's an enrollment conversation, right? It's an enrollment conversation in.
What do you mean by that? 'Cause you've used that twice now, and I just want to make sure people are with us.
Great. Yeah. So enrollment is in some ways like I'm painting a picture of what's possible between us. And I am inviting you to step in as a co-creator in that dynamic. And I'm doing it with fierceness. And I'm doing it, I'm championing it, and I'm doing it from a place of love. But how it might come off is it might even look like I'm triggered. And it might even look like I'm going to fight to the death for this thing to come alive, because it is beneficial to both of us. And it is ultimately what we've committed to. And whatever is happening is a deterioration and a deviation from that. And we're better than that. We can grow through this. So that's the enrollment, is the inviting of, like, I'm going this direction, and I'm committed to making the relationship go direction. Are you on board? And at that point, if that is not possible. If the person doesn't want to grow and the person can't be enrolled in what it is that you're committed to creating with them, or the agreements have changed and they no longer want to participate, or they keep coming back to the same pattern and they're not actually honoring the we space, right? They're not committed to the we space like you are. Then it might be at that point that one, in some ways, feels like they have no other choice but to either compromise themselves and stay in the relationship, or to walk away as a declaration and faith that they can go create what they want in the world, and that they're far too important to compromise themselves and allow their sense of self to deteriorate in the name of sacrificial love.
Yeah, and that's it's a pretty powerful vision there.
So I'm curious, just like, how does that land? And does that, given your question, does that feel like it fits into what you were asking? And I'm curious if you have another thought about that too.
You're basically painting as clear a picture as possible of what you're wanting in the relationship.
Yeah.
And in some ways you're trying to get shared reality, right? Like, this is what I see. This is what I'm standing for. Do you want this? You know, I think what can be tricky is there's still a lot of how questions there, right? So if you are in a, like a perennial dynamic or a core scene, as they would call it in Imago, right? So there's a core scene happening where, in this instance, he's saying something that's, at least in her view, is critical, and she's experiencing that she's getting hurt by it, right? Yeah. He's in the perspective, what would he be saying? You're being too sensitive, something like that.
You're being too sensitive, or you're not using your brain, or you have no goals. I have goals. You need goals.
Yeah.
Those are criticisms. Yeah.
So there's a couple of things there. So one is, I would actually be curious, and this is really hard to do as her in this situation, right? But let's just say you and I were kind of like, looking in the fishbowl and sort of able to like hit pause and kind of like discuss things. I'm curious if there's any positive intent in what he's saying there, right? So I know that's what she's hearing. Is it just he's saying that to basically be a dick? Sorry, I don't know if I can swear on your channel, but like, he's kind of being a bit of a douche and he knows that. Yeah. Or is it that somehow he's what a legitimate masculine concern in this sort of situation, even if he's communicating it poorly, could be something like, your life is better when you have goals. Like, I want to help champion your goals. I see that you're, I don't know, maybe you're going along with the flow and it's not helping you in your career. Or you could, you keep talking about wanting to have your own business, but I don't ever see you like enact on it, right? And sometimes, and I can even relate to this as a guy, like sometimes that can bring up fear, almost like, oh, I'm afraid for you, or I'm seeing something for you that you're not taking a stand for, right? Is there any of that, or is it actually just, he's not sort of seeing you, or there's a sensitivity difference that is possibly not even workable, so one person's sense of, and let's be honest, it's probably quite often, not always, but going to happen a little bit this way, right? That the guys respond themselves to edge and criticism, as well as love and praise, much more so, I think, than the feminine.
Yeah.
Right. So I think, David Data talks well about this. So it can be difficult sometimes as a guy where you're used, and you yourself think you've benefited from this kind of criticism, right? And often guys have benefited from another guy saying, hey, dude, you can do this better. That was okay, but you can do this better. Or actually, that's really, you're falling short there and you're letting yourself down. You're letting the side down. You need to go and think hard about your contribution or what you're doing.
Yeah.
So, I think it is, as guys, we're trying to learn how to bring our sensitivity as well as our challenge. And it might sometimes be that our challenge is not that helpful in relationship with a woman. Yeah. Is that your experience?
I think that's, I love what you said in the beginning, which I think is important to remember, is that there's most likely a positive intention behind the dialogue. That,
or at least just curious about that, right? I say, he may not, but you could even ask that question. Like, so I heard you say I didn't have any goals. That kind of hurts hearing that. Could you clarify if there's any positive intention? Is there something that you're trying to help me with? Because it doesn't feel that way, but I want to try.
Yeah. Most likely he speaks to himself that way.
So that's a good
Right.
distinction there.
And I would say that if and here's where I think that it gets interesting, is that if he is speaking to himself that way, which I do believe he is, I believe that there's a positive intention behind it. And therefore there's a positive intention behind the communication in general, even if it's a reaction. I think that there's still it's like, if you got this, what would having that do for you, right? Like if my partner kind of got the message, even though if it comes out clumsy and maybe even abusive, what would that having that do for me? And most likely what it is I would, like you were saying, I would feel safe. There's a way in which maybe I feel like I could rely on you more, or that we would have a better connection. That doesn't justify. And
I understood what you said. Are you saying from his perspective, if she in this instance were to have more concrete goals, he would feel safer?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know that. I don't know that.
I'm making even as a possibility. But
as a possibility. Yeah, absolutely.
So you're almost saying the part of him that's fearful and critical may need some soothing. And at the moment, the way he sees that is, if you had some goals, I would feel more safe or relaxed or something like that. He may not have even articulated that to himself. I mean, we may be wrong. We're hypothesizing.
We're playing with it. We're playing with it. Yeah.
I mean, interesting. I don't think the feminine would go to that place as the first explanation of why a guy is being critical in that way. Right?
I don't think so either.
There's also better ways to say things and communicate. And I think Clayton and I take a stand for it. And I also own that sometimes in my past, when I've been afraid and fearful, I've been critical.
Yeah.
Not my finest moments, not my best way of being, but it's tricky territory in there sometimes,
Yeah. And also when I've been in pain, I've been critical. Right. And I think that a lot of what I find in myself is that when I'm being critical, or I'm angry, or I'm reacting and I'm saying things that I'm not proud of, it's because I'm actually unwilling to make the maneuver into vulnerability. Right. And the maneuver into vulnerability would be to say, actually, I'm feeling really out of control, uncertain, and powerless right now.
Wow.
And right. And the way to,
amazing. Wow. Yeah.
Right. I'm feeling completely powerless, or I'm feeling helpless in this situation, and I don't know what to do. But because that is such a painful place to be, and as one continues to expand their capacity to be with helplessness and powerlessness and perhaps sadness, we don't have to run in with this kind of protector, this critic that then covers it up with anger to try to regain some sense of control. That usually is in the form of a criticism towards self or towards other. I don't think a lot of men have clear access to that level of vulnerability unless they've done some type of work, or been maybe had really good childhoods, where that kind of vulnerability and being able to be helpless is actually okay and not judged.
Yeah.
And I just want to say that I think that this can be, the piece that I want to put out here is that, even let's just assume that that's what's happening in a situation with this guy who is criticizing his woman in the way that he is. It doesn't justify or validate or say that this is the appropriate response for him to do that, or that let's just say this, that it's of the highest utility for him to criticize in that way, that it's workable. But it is to perhaps open up that there's a deeper dimension of something going on that has more to do with him being out of control and feeling weak and helpless than any reflection on her and her character, which can then have us get more curious and less reactive, and actually not take things so deeply, so personally, which could help us turn things around.
Yeah. I like what you're pointing to. Yeah, it's interesting. There's a place that I'm just kind of in touch with, which is actually a little bit more. It's a little bit more of a political metaphor, right? So sometimes people who are innately, and I use the word innately specifically, sort of, I'm meaning not that you identify with a particular political party, but you have a more inherently conservative personality. Yeah. Sometimes you don't like people getting help and handouts because you know yourself, you benefited from toughing it and getting deeper and bootstrapping yourself. And now you look at your life and you think, yeah, I had a hard time, but now I've got, this better career or this better home or this, because I had to go through the hard work of it. Right. And I think a lot of guys can sort of relate to that way of being. Like, the world's a dangerous place. It's difficult. It's tough. It does not owe you a living. It's hard out there, particularly if you're a more kind of rugged individualist sort of character. And so your way of helping people, I think, is sometimes to want that for them. So my way of loving you possibly could be, even if I'm abrasive, or even if I'm clumsy, or even if I'm mildly abusive in my language at times, the way that I think I can help you is by having you be tougher, or having you be stronger. Yeah. And sometimes there is a partial truth in there, right? I'm a sensitive guy. I do my best to own it, right? Other people who know me well know I'm a sensitive guy, right? I'm not only a sensitive guy, I can also be tough and strong and other things. But not everyone in the world is going to welcome your sensitivity in all forms all the time. And sometimes your sensitivity is also reactivity that's undistinguished. So sometimes there is this intuition of your way of proceeding in the world. If you're going to go out and say start your own business, you might have to get a little tougher, right? You might have to take that rejection a bit better and get up and get back onto the next one, and that sales call, and get onto the next one. And I'm just sort of curious where you think those things meet, the sort of kind of developing fitness and robustness and kind of bounce back ability, but alongside honoring our sensitivity and our wounding and the places that we're vulnerable and frail.
I mean, that's a big question. Yeah, that's a big question to throw over the fence. And then, I mean, just to put it in the way that I'm interpreting it, is you're in some ways asking, like, when do you kind of accept what is versus when do you go create what it is that you want? Does it seem like it falls into those two camps? And if there's a difference, let me know.
Yeah. Well, I definitely know the distinction that you're talking about.
Yeah. And are you talking about that distinction, or are you, is there something more?
Well, they might be sort of like, running mates or kissing cousins or something. So I'm talking about, let's just put it like, let's just say in our friendship, right? To put it in if I were noticing that you had a habitual sensitivity to something, right? Let's just say, I don't know, anytime that your favorite TV show gets mentioned, right? You seem very sort of like, sensitive about it right now. So as a good friend, I could learn, well, maybe I don't need to bring it up, right? Or maybe I could cut Clayton some slack because I know he has a sensitivity. So just like I have a gluten sensitivity, like you might have a TV sensitivity or something, right? And then there might also be the part as your friend where I might say, hey, you're kind of sensitive about that, and I sense you would be more free if we could loosen that up a little bit, right? So, I might banter you, right? Or I might just say, hey, buddy, from a loving place, like I'm curious, is there something in here? Because it almost seems a disproportionately sensitive response. Now, that's sort of a judgment, right? Or at least it could be a discernment. How do I know what's a disproportionately sensitive response? I don't know what you're wounding, triggering, patterning. I mean, maybe I do because I'm your friend and I've known you for a while.
Yeah.
But there could be an impulse to say, hey, I'm not just trying to criticize you here. I actually sense there's something that could have you have an easier time. And that's sort of what I'm fighting for, even if, as I say it, I may have some criticism, or it may land critically in your world.
Yeah.
So kind of learning how to do that. It's because I think some of us know that building capacity or actually reducing sensitivities is also a good thing. I don't just want to be the most sensitive guy in the restaurant for the rest of my life all the time, unless that's just true for me. But I can maybe over time learn, like, oh, I can have a little bit of this or a little bit of that, and I'm actually developing desensitizing. So I want to own my sensitivity, but sometimes it's worth desensitizing as well in service of connection, in service of just having an easier time, in service of not having to lose a nice social experience because you got triggered about something that we could desensitize you to without actually compromising your authenticity. Your authenticity isn't just your reactivity, right? That's where I try and use this reactivity versus sensitivity sort of distinction. And it's hard to know sometimes, To root it back right in this example, how would how might this show up differently if there was a known sensitivity about certain forms of feedback or criticism, right? And we also know that those of us who are prone to fear of rejection are likely to have heightened sensitivity about certain things. But it's hard to know, right? If I slap you on the back, bro style, and you're like, hey, that's great, right? But if you have a fragile shoulder, that's not going to feel great, you know? So presumably subjectively, you would have to take into account when Jack's kind of doing that to my shoulder, he's not just doing that. It's also my sensitivity that's in there as well. So I might have to own that. You know, it's not, he's kind of, he can do that to 9 other people and they're fine, but he does it to me. And actually, you know, I'm shocked.
Yeah.
You know, so you know, it's just saying there's a lot of subjectivity in these things as well. And I'm said differently, I'm not wanting to set people up for a level of like therapeutic communication from guys that may not be forthcoming, or the guy that can do it may not be the guy that you actually have polarity with, you know, or the guy that can do it may not actually have some other things that are important to you. So
how do you navigate that? How do you navigate between in some ways, like another way that I would put it, and you let me know if you feel like this lands, but it's kind of like choosing your battles. Right? Like this could fall in the domain of choosing your battles. Like how do you choose what to actually speak up about within a connection versus what to actually let slide because it's not in service of maybe either of you, or it's in service of one of you, but not both. Like, and maybe that's starting to actually untangle it a little bit.
That's a profound discernment. Sometimes it's, you know, it's a difficult discernment.
Yeah. I was just admiring, I was smiling there because I was admiring just your articulation around giving feedback and giving feedback to a friend and being able to do that with a certain sensitivity. And what I was also hearing too is kind of like a respect and love for that person. Right. And, you know, there's a couple things that come to mind just about this, and I'd love to hear your opinion on it. But I think that context is everything. Meaning, like, what kind of relationship do you have with this person? You know, is this a professional work relationship where there's like a shared goal where the way that the two of you work together is, and you're both committed to that goal, and anything that's getting in the way of it is going to be on the chopping block, or at least going to be brought up to be talked about, right? Is this a casual acquaintance or a friendship where it's like, well, actually, what are we really even doing here? Where are we moving towards? Maybe I don't even know what that person wants, because, you know, I could be giving feedback to somebody because I don't agree with how they're showing up, but is it actually in service of them, or is it actually a trigger that I need to sit with because it means something about me? My reaction to means something about my limitations.
Normally it does, you know,
totally.
Or at least that's in there somewhere. Yeah. And it's hard. Absolutely. It's hard to slow down enough to identify that, right? It's hard not to get defensive or critical or projective. There's also probably, you know, and you may know more about this than I do, this, you know, transactional analysis, right? Critical parent. That's probably in there in a lot of dynamics, and probably there's one partner that more easily is going to occupy that space. How do you distinguish that? How do you kind of let that go?
One piece I wanted to say, just to wrap up my last thought, was just that, like, so the context in some ways may create permission to be able to be honest and revealing of your experience. But then I also think that there's a component of, like, Jack, for instance, if I know what you want is, let's just say let's say that you're trying to put on 30 pounds of muscle, and I know that that's what you want. And then what I witness is that you keep skipping meals, or there's a way in which you keep skipping the gym. And I noticed that it would be in service of our relationship, because I see an incongruity that maybe you're present to, and maybe you're not. And that might be important at, like, actually a really loving act for me to call that out. But that's a product of me in some ways knowing what you said you wanted versus what I think you want versus what I think is best for you. Right? Like, am I calling you out because I'm making an assumption about what I think is best for you? Or is it that I'm experiencing perhaps that, like, you know, let's say that you're a friend who is, like, really a stickler around time, right? And there's a real, like, kind of neuroticism around time, and that tends to maybe get in the way of relationships or create stress. Like, if I'm noticing that is actually creating a quality of life that is deteriorating, it might make sense for me as a loving friend, which is what I'm committed to say something about that, to bring to your attention. But if I'm finding it annoying because somehow it puts me in some type of line of fire, or it's something that I don't agree with, I might not say something. I might like be with it first and notice, like, what is this about? Like, you know, where is it that I'm like maybe disowning my punctuality or judging punctuality in a degree that is actually stopping me from being relational with my friend.
Mm-hmm.
So anything come up for, as I say that?
On this specific issue, right? In relation to you, right? So let's just get real for a moment. So I remember back in the day experiencing more freedom when I started to give myself permission for like a few minutes to not really matter, right? Because sometimes I can be 4 is 4. I have this even with my clients. They're like, oh, all right, 4 p.m. You called it 4 p.m. And maybe coaching's a little different, right? We're in a professional context. But what I had, and this is not just specific to you, this is a thing I've had in other places. If I've sort of hustled to get somewhere to be on time, and then we're not starting on time, even if it's a few minutes, then I'm like, oh, well, I could have just made a smoothie, or I could have just, another person says, hey, I'm just making a smoothie. And I'm like, oh, yeah, I guess I could have been making my smoothie,
Yeah.
But when I get
Are you talking about me? Is this other person me, Jack?
Well, I don't know. I mean, you do make smoothies, but I don't know. But I think in the work context, you had a bit more like, hey, 4 can be 4:02 as long as we just ping each other and say, hey, roll in a couple of minutes late, no big deal.
Yeah.
And I've actually found I've had a bit more freedom to get into that mode. I think 2 minutes is probably different than 20 minutes, right? So but I think we have a shared reality around that. So I'm just saying that's actually an interesting example of I don't mind 4 meaning 4 if we're both meaning it, or it meaning 4:03 if we're both meaning it. It's just the discrepancy when I've hustled, that's a little harder. So I actually think that helped our relationship to get a little bit more, on the same page about that.
Yeah.
In my experience.
Yeah. Great. I love it. That's a great example. Yeah, totally. Okay. And I'm observing just meta kind of where we've taken this into all this is related to, and I'll just tie it back right now for a moment. Then I'd love to hear how you there's something I missed that you tie back to. So we're talking about like how to start loving yourself, how to instantly begin to up level your capacity to love yourself in relationship, in being single. One way that I think is an ultimate act of self-love is to be able to walk away from a connection that's no longer serving you, or a connection that you are compromising yourself in consistently. Another way of loving yourself is also realizing what is it that's being unsaid right now in the relationship? What am I not taking a stand for? What is it that I need to volunteer into the space and allow the relationship to reorganize around this truth, so that I can be more in alignment, being in this connection?
Yeah.
And then we're kind of talking also now a little bit about like, what does it mean to honor your truth even in friendship with each other? What does it look like to take a stand for somebody? And when do you take a stand for somebody versus actually realize that maybe this is work that you need to do and be with yourself around? Yeah. So we're kind of hitting this from a number of different angles. And, is there anything you want to add to that? I can kind of look through the comments if there's, you want to.
Well, I appreciate your summary of it. I think you've just tied it in really nicely there. One of the things that lets you know if, even in your instance of like, hey, you want to grow muscle, but I noticed that you don't hit the gym enough, is also just how does that land in someone's world, right? Someone could be like, yeah, I get it. Thank you. Right. Or you might find you hit a lot of defensiveness, right? Like, so if you're hitting a lot of defensiveness, that could be another form of conversation, or you might just let that go, right? Depending on how much of a stand you're taking for each other, whether there's even a capacity to kind of reflect on that kind of thing. But the defensiveness is probably what makes the sort of interaction that you're talking about originally difficult, is that we're probably not going to have shared reality, and probably at least on one or if not both sides, there's going to be some defensiveness. So now your sense that I'm even in your corner is probably limited. And I might not be in your corner. I might just be standing opposite you, being critical. But it's the finding the shared reality there beneath the defenses. That's what can be really difficult. My experience working with clients with this kind of stuff.
Yeah. And do you have any ways of getting to that shared reality that can make finding this overlap a little bit more simple? Because I know that when I'm in those situations, I can get so myopic where like I'm just not able to see the shared reality at all, and suddenly there's an adversarial dynamic that I have with my partner, and I'm triggered. And maybe we spoke to this already a little bit, but I feel like you're kind of coming at it from the standpoint of defenses, talking about kind of seeing through the defenses.
Yeah.
Is there anything that you would say there?
Well, again, this is not always that I have been able to do this. I think at our best, we include the possibility that our defense may be in there somewhere, right? So even if it's just when you're hitting your journal later that evening, the next day, or when you next do, just to get curious, if there's something that you were really amped up about, there might be a defense in there. Right now, sometimes you can get amped up because you're so passionately protecting a value of yours. Right? But I think it can be easy to imagine that's what you're doing. Like, I'm just standing for, I'm just standing for romance, well, okay, but you're now, you're pretty amped up about this romance thing. So is that really what it is? Or is there something else happening? And that can be difficult for any of us, myself included, sometimes to slow down enough, right? So normally it takes, relaxing your nervous system enough to get back into contact with yourself in a little bit more of a rich way. And it also sometimes takes humility, because you might notice the thing that you've been, criticized for, or had pushed back, or had said to you, there may be some truth in it, right? Even if it's being said in a less calibrated way than would be ideal. So I think there's also just, ideally, if I really care about growing and the truth, I might try and see if I can hear something from you, even when you're saying it badly to me. Now that's a high standard. That's difficult. And maybe sometimes we can't do that, but you sort of get where it's like, okay, there was a little bit of your, projection, or your paternalism, or your something was mixed in there. But if I could strip that a little bit, what you're actually saying is, this thing is kind of difficult about the way that we relate, and there's something in that is of value, right? Or there's something at least I want to get curious about. So if your curiosity is stopped, you could just imagine your defense has probably kicked in. And if you're going to have a generalization, I would start there and just sort of imagine that might be true until you could see it might be true. And if it's not true, that's fine. But the curiosity will kind of maybe let you know.
To bring in a personal example to this, to kind of land it from a different direction, is when I find that Asia is my partner is giving me some feedback about something, and we're both triggered, and say she calls me, she thinks that I'm being an asshole. The more that I can just actually look for how that's true first, before getting defensive, but actually like look for the ways in which I'm being an asshole, and maybe realizing that, actually I am an asshole at times. And this could be one of them. That hits the kind of curiosity piece that you're talking about. Right. Like actually being really curious. And also what it also challenges, though, sometimes is, I have this identity often that can come up because I'm in this field of relationship coaching, where the last thing I want to be is an asshole in relationship. And so that creates an unwillingness for me to see when I'm perhaps being an asshole. Right. And so it gets me defensive because I'm so attached to this way of like seeing myself. And so it just teaches me to be, and this is just like ongoing work in progress, but to like let go of this image that, that perhaps, like I'm messy in relationship, and I make mistakes, and I say things, and I'm insensitive. And the more that I can own that, the more that then I think that opens up my ability to be everything else as well. Rather than trying to avoid that, because I actually just become even a greater asshole when I won't own being an asshole. Like that's actually what happens when I won't own being an asshole. I just become an asshole in the process. So, and yes, we can't swear on my channel.
Good. I think that's really well said. I love it. I love the rawness and the honesty. Maybe, we can own, or just as guys, we can sort of own. I don't think we're the best sometimes as guys at seeing the places where we're being a douchebag.
Yeah.
And because I think it's different. I think guys give guys feedback in different kinds of ways, right? So guys might lay into each other. They might banter each other. So they might use humor, or they might have a straight shooting direct conversation.
Yeah.
But I think there are ways that and maybe it's even hard for the masculine essence to even fully understand this. So I'm owning, I might not fully understand it, right? That there's ways that we can hurt the feminine that it's almost difficult to know what that might even be like, right? Or it's not fully replicable from hanging out with other guys. Like things that we might do or say might not impact in the way that they are. And most of our guy friends aren't really depending upon us. Right? You might depend upon you as like a friend, right? Hey, we said we're going to go to the cinema, show up, or like, hey, I'm reaching out for some support. Can you give me some support? Yeah. But I think there's a whole different level of thing that can happen in an intimate relationship. Yeah. And often if you're on the receiving end of, hey, you're being a douchebag, the way that might be communicated to you can be the thing that you're defending against, right? So it might not be that someone's going to say really calmly, hey, Jack, I just have this really sort of subtle observation right now. I'm not sure, but I'm curious. Are you being a douchebag? It's probably not going to land that way, right? It's probably going to come with some trigger or some anger or something that you're also going to be impacted with. Yeah. So.
Yeah. Interesting. Just for the sake of time, and also there's a couple of questions that have come through. I'm curious if we want to field any of these. Does that sound?
Your choice, man. Your show.
Okay. Cool. Okay. So here's one that came in from a gentleman on my list. He said, I do have a question. And he says his name. I'm not going to say his name. And he said his girlfriend and him broke up 2 months ago, but they still live in the same house. And he's trying to do no contact to give her space, but she is the one that's always coming to him.
Wait,
they still have conversations. In the same house. They still have conversations and they still go places. He's looking for advice on how to.
They also live together, though.
They live together. So they broke up. They broke up. They've been together for
together. Is that just sort of like? Can you do no contact if you live together? That sounds like a really hard.
That sounds really hard. That sounds really difficult. You'd almost have to be like dodging from room to room like a ninja, or possibly maybe staying somewhere else for the majority of time. But that sounds like an impossible task. He's saying any advice would be appreciated on how we could reconcile at this point.
Reconcile, get back together.
So it sounds like the breakup was not. He did not choose this, and now he's living with her, and it sounds very confusing because they've broken up. Yet he's trying to take space, and she keeps coming to hang out, and I imagine that's probably delaying his healing process, and it's probably really confusing. And
I would imagine that you don't want to label this period as no contact, right? Life circumstances may dictate, right, perhaps economically, that you can't afford not to live in the same place right now, or that you know, one who's trying to rent another place, but you just haven't had luck finding it. So sometimes life deals you these difficult circumstances, but I think it's good not to misframe it to yourself. So this isn't no contact, like still living together. So it might be that, this is just this messy thing you got to do until someone can, stay with a friend. But you may also want to turn the heat up on that, right? It might be better if you're really trying to clarify what this is and possibly have a period of no contact to actually make that happen, right? So is someone going to need to go and do an extended stay at the Marriott hotel? Is someone going to need to go call their aunt and go and use their guest room for a while? Or is someone going to go find a sublease or an Airbnb or something that just allows that space so that,
why is that important? Why?
It's actually because we want to come together and talk. Like we go into a coffee shop, we're choosing a neutral venue, trying to do that in a place that we've already had connection together, and now we're sort of not meant to be. That just, that sounds really hard on both of you, actually. So I think that would be step one, because I don't think you can probably reconcile from a place of messiness. I think it'd be easier to reconcile from, do we want to choose this? And we know we're choosing it not just because you can't afford not to be on my couch. And so I'm not judging that. Sometimes, I know what it's like to have money. I know what it's like to not have money. It's sometimes you don't have money. It's like, okay, figure it out.
And we're assuming that that's what the limitation is.
Okay. That might not be the.
Yeah. And you're also, but you're bringing up a really good point. And I think this piece of no contact too, what you're saying is that the no contact restores choice rather than reactively being around each other. It actually allows you to be intentional with your engagements during this kind of really messy time. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. Great. And I would say too, like, just to add in on this, is having boundaries right now is going to be incredibly important. And if you feel like you're kind of reactively in relationship with her and it's not working for you, it's stopping you from healing, it's stopping you from going through the transformation necessary to find yourself and connect with you again, and she's an obstacle to that right now, then you might have to have a conversation about really prioritizing the work that you have to do if the two of you are in fact broken up, so that you can take this as powerful feedback to become a better human being, and that the two of you can be in contact on the other side of that. And that's a way of injecting self-respect and also listening to what has occurred, right? What's occurred is they've broken up with you. So they're in that breakup, there's an implied message that they don't want to do life with you. And so how do you listen to that, honor yourself, and then, like Jack's saying, be more at choice around what the engagements are going to look like moving forward? Yeah.
I like that.
Okay. Yeah. I got another question. Oh, go ahead. Yeah.
You say, I don't think that you're being clear with your boundaries, which in this instance, I think could be, let's actually be broken up. So I'm not sort of available for random hangouts. I'm not available to be your, when you've got an issue, I'm going to be the ear you listen to. I don't think that's actually going to stop you reconciling. I think it might actually support it, right? Because I think if someone breaks up with you and then still keeps hanging out with you, and you're sort of doing it because you want their connection, but you also realize, well, hang on a minute, now you sort of downgraded me from sort of partner to kind of, I don't know, lover companion. I actually don't want that. Like I want a partner, and I see that with you, and that's the stand that I'm taking. So we're not going to do a weakened down version. We're either going to do the thing, or if we're not going to do the thing, that's going to be really difficult because I love you and I want to be with you. Yeah. But I'll figure it out. Just, it's sort of like 0-1, I think, and again, life is sometimes messy. Sometimes it doesn't always immediately go 0-1, but I think just having that in the back of your mind and noticing, is there a fear that if I don't say yes to her advances or to her connection or to her having to stay here, that then I'm afraid that she's going to kind of be like, oh, well, you've let go of us, or, some kind of reactivity. That reactivity you could be incorrectly intuiting that it might be there, but normally the reactivity isn't the truth, right? So something that just has to come out, burn through, and you can also challenge it, if it comes your way.
Great. So, I hear you inviting, like, again, really kind of claiming what it is that you need rather than being reactively driven into a circumstance that's not actually good for you out of fear of losing somebody, but like really honoring yourself and being willing to walk away in the form of no contact, if that's ultimately what is going to help you grow during this time.
Yeah.
Prioritizing yourself. Yeah.
Yeah. And it may also be good for her too.
Yeah.
Like if she's meant to be getting clarity about whether she wants to really be in a relationship with you again, she might need to be on her own a little bit to figure that out, right? Rather than sort of still having, just access to you.
Yeah. Yeah. So
differently, that's no contact, not from a perspective of I'm trying to punish you. It's no contact from I want clarity, and I want the best outcome for both of us. And the more clarity, the more love, in a sense. Yeah.
Beautiful distinction too, that this is no contact, not as a strategy, not as an agenda of something I'm trying to create over there and hurt you or make you miss me. It's not another expression of you disowning your power. It's an expression or a boundary of, here's the territory that I need to create in my life so that I can come into my own. And I'm prioritizing that. Yeah. Great. I can imagine us doing a whole video on no contact at some point and really opening that up and digging into it. So, here's the thing. I'm also realizing too, we got a little bit of a late start because of the technical
just over the hour here, aren't we?
Yeah, we're at 3:15. Is there anything else that you want to say regarding this topic that feels like it's been left unsaid? Anything you wanted to get to that you think would be important to continue to bolster and create scaffolding around this idea of loving oneself, honoring oneself?
Nothing's immediately coming up. I was just reflecting back to the sort of the initial conversation that you read out, and just sort of sometimes getting a third party can be helpful, right? They need to be skillful in their means. But just having someone that might be able to kind of push back on one partner and say, you're going to have to say that differently, right? Or here's the essence of what's trying to be said here, and this is a better way of saying it.
Yeah.
And the other thing that comes up is, so when someone's hurt you, often your protector and defender will come online.
Yeah.
Right. So if someone's, you think of a dog that's been hurt, right? Sometimes it's going to lash back out, or it's going to be sensitive in certain ways. Sometimes and this might be really difficult to do, but just really letting someone know, like, wow, that really hurt me, without having to defend yourself. So sometimes the masculine can respond to that, right? Because if the masculine's desire is really to hurt you, and that's really what I'm trying to do, not just in my worst moments or my, my mega triggers, but like if my general orientation is I'm trying to criticize and hurt you, that's not going to be a good choice to be in relationship together. But if actually something else is truer than that, which is I do want to support you, and I do care for you, and I have some things on your behalf that I worry about, and maybe we need to find a different way of talking about that, right? Or maybe there's a truth that you're disowning that could also come to the table about, I don't know, in this instance, what was it? Lack of goals. Like, I don't know, what is, let's just put him aside for a moment. What's the truth about that? I would be curious. Like, is there something in there that someone else might just objectively say, hey, your life could be a bit better in this way if you took aim, because you're underplaying your power or your value or something? Or is there nothing in there at all? Because if there's nothing in there at all, that's normally, it doesn't hurt quite so much, right? It's like if I'm not having to defend something. So just a few, I liked your stand of, why don't we proceed as if I'm going to fight as hard as I can for what I want in the relationship? Do that first, because if you've done that, it's then easier. If you do decide to walk away, you're like, well, I gave it my all. I really tried to see if some other ways forward. I tried to give a different perspective, all that stuff. It's worth doing that first.
Yeah. And I love the point about that, to get curious, that if somebody's saying something to you and it really hurts that much, it might be evidence to look for where it could be true. You might have a problem with the way it was delivered, but look for where what they're saying might be, that they might actually be seeing something that is worth you taking a look at, for the purpose of being able to grow through the feedback, not necessarily take it, not like you're, an emotional dumpster that needs to just take somebody's crap. But for the sake of your own kind of growth, maybe to be able to see the positive intention behind what they're saying. And that still doesn't mean that you can't have a conversation with them about their delivery or about the means that they use to carry out the feedback.
Yeah. Sometimes you've got to train people, right? Including guys.
Oh, absolutely.
Train them a little on how to give you feedback in a way that if you can hear it, if it's useful, and if it's not, then it's not. Yeah.
So Jack, let's just transition here. I'm curious if anybody wants to get in touch with you, if anybody wants to see more of your insightful content and hear more about the different perspectives that you have on life transformation, being authentic, and maybe this is their first time seeing you, where would they go? What could they do? Is there a way to get in touch with you?
Yeah. Well, I also have a YouTube channel. I don't know if you can pop that.
I can post that
or something. You can also find me at jackbutler.com.
Yeah.
And that will give you pretty much everything that I do.
Cool.
I do individual coaching. I also periodically do group programs. So check that out. And Yeah, you'll also see if you come across to my website, there's a free resource that you can download right off the homepage. So that's just a way to kind of get into some of my ecosystem.
Yeah, beautiful. I'm posting 2 links here. The first one I'm posting is Jack's YouTube channel, and the second one I'm posting is a webinar that Jack and I have done called the 3 Keys to Being Relationship Ready. So have a gander at both of these. Oh, that's not a way to do it. Hold on. Here is Jack's YouTube channel first.
Oh,
and then
yeah.
And then I'll let's see, where is the oh, I can't even get that.
You may want to post those under the actual video at some point.
Yeah, I'll do that. Yeah. Beautiful.
Yeah, I'd love to hear from any of you. I do encourage you to take the webinar if you haven't taken it, because it's just really, it's pithy content, right? Today we've been a little bit more organic, right? And we're kind of riffing, and we've brought in lots of different stuff. The webinar is a different sort of energy, right? It's us being pretty focused. We worked for a long period of time to hone this material. We cut it down. We cut out bits so it's really essential. It's really like to use a Clayton Olson metaphor, it's the tip of the spear, right? It's the kind of the point of potency. So
yeah. No, that's a really great way of putting it. And I'll put that video link in the description below so you can check it out. I'll also post in the comments and pin it as well.
Yeah.
Great.
I want to say just a quick hello to Colleen. Hello to Gina. Thank you for being here.
Sarah.
Living Peach Dream. Love you guys. Thanks for that. Lots of feedback there.
Terry, well. Thank you. Gina, hey, what's going on? Good to see you. Yeah.
Yes, it says keep this live. Very interesting already. Good.
Great.
Good. Well, thanks for having me.
Beautiful, Jack. Well, thanks for coming on, man. Yeah. Good, John, as usual. And looking forward to when we do it again.
Awesome. All right.
Okay. All right.
Thanks, everyone.
Take care, guys. Bye.
Cheers.